all fucked up now. How's everybody doing today? This is the Bronx Tech Show. This is our first show. My name is Miguel Sanchez. I'm the founder of Mass Ideation, The Rise TV, and co-founder of MetaBronx.
And I'm Philip Shearer. I'm representing Scenic, The Glass Files, and I'm a co-founder of MetaBronx as well.
So on this show, we plan to interview guests in the innovation and technology sectors and teach people about entrepreneurship.
So for this first show, we're going to interview each other. So everyone gets a sense of how this Bronx innovation ecosystem began. I'm going to start this off. So Miguel, Mr. Sanchez,
Shoot.
so you are not a white man, and and you didn't attend Harvard or Stanford.
Those are my safety schools.
I knew that. But you became an entrepreneur in media and technology. So how did you do that?
So, my story is I grew up in the Bronx, right next to Yankee Stadium, during the crack epidemic and birth of hip hop.
That's the 80s.
I was born in 1979, so I'm an 80s baby. I grew up on 167th and Shakespeare, which is really close to Yankee Stadium. I grew up in a block that I would say I was so lucky to grow up in that specific block. If I would have been born one block over in any direction, probably my whole life would have been different, right? So
That's reassuring.
I was born in a block where it was a bunch of hardworking people, a lot of people who ended up doing big things that were able to push me along with them. But the way it all started was I used to draw a lot, and one day my parents came home with a stolen computer basically, and they didn't know how to use it, but they knew it was the future, luckily, and they just put it in my room and said, figure it out. So I started making art on the computer. I figured out how to install everything, and I started making art. And I started to want to do more and more computer art. And then when I got to high school, I went to high school of art and design. I actually got into art and design because I went through a program called Boys Harbor where I was working on traditional art skills, but some, computer graphic stuff. So when I got into art and design, I was literally working on Photoshop 1, right? So my teachers were like painters, right? So they didn't know tech. So we were learning on our own again. So I went from computer by myself learning to high school learning Photoshop, and my teachers couldn't even help us. So again, I learned how to learn on my own, right? And in the tech world. So another thing I started to do was just understand trends, right? Photoshop was the first thing I saw. There was another 3D program. And one of my teachers in high school told us, this was funny, because he's like, if you have any money, invest in Pixar. So I'm like, who has money? First of all, what's money? And he's like, tell your parents, invest in Pixar. So we didn't know what he was talking about till the movie started coming out. And that was one of the first understanding of tech startup, right? We could have invested in, he told us before it was even out. So 3D animation and all that. The funny part of all that is one of my first jobs ever was creating online advertising for movies, for Pixar movies.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so I worked on Finding Nemo,
Really?
The Incredibles.
I
all
did
this
not
stuff.
know that.
Yeah. So
And it was so Pixar. It was Disney people, right, who wanted to make 3D films, but Disney didn't think that it made sense. So then Steve Jobs.
Yep. So basically, I worked for a company that had Disney as a client. So we did all the
So
online
an advertising agency.
Online, yep, and an advertising agency. So I was in the online advertising department. We were the first people to be making banners for movies and annoying trailer ads. I was one of the first people to put a video in a banner. You're welcome. So we
Good one.
we were doing innovative stuff, and But there came a point where there was two things, right? I felt like I reached kind of like a ceiling.
And so,
where,
how old were you at this point?
probably like 22, 23.
Right.
And I did have other jobs before that, right? Like I worked for the first ever publicly traded advertising agency called DME. It was called Digital Mafia Entertainment, right? And it was an awesome place, right? It was all minorities. We were, they brought everybody in from the top companies went to work there. Company didn't have a great exit. There was a whole bunch of shenanigans.
Why am I not surprised?
Yeah, but it set me up to get a job at Disney. I mean, at this company for Disney, working for Disney, and a real funny thing happened to me during that made me want to become an entrepreneur. And what that was at one point I had been doing a lot of work, right? So we would do entire banner campaigns, each person. Like I would be doing Finding Nemo 50 banner ads, right? And at one point there was a chart of all the work we were doing, right? And then it was the chart, and it was like John, 3 projects, Derek, 4 projects, Luke, 6 projects, or 3 projects, Miguel, 9 projects, right? So we're looking at the chart, all of us, and everybody looks at me, and they're like, "How are you doing 9 projects?" So another guy, Luke, asked me, "How much money do you make?" And I was like, and I literally told him back then. I was like, I think it was like 2000, 2001. I told him I was making 40 grand. He was like, he grabbed me, dragged me into the owner's office, and he was like, "How do you pay Miguel that much less than us? Look at all the work he does. He's working on double all of us."
Well, and just to be clear, so this is not the agency where it was a bunch of minorities. This is
This was no. When I went to
like
work for Disney, there was no minority. I was the minority.
Just checking.
Yeah.
So basically, a bunch of white people. Then Miguel gets to do
Most of the work. Yes, yeah.
yeah.
But
Yeah, that sounds about right. Yeah.
But I became very good at my craft because of it, right?
Right.
But at the same time, right? Oh, so I didn't finish the story. So we go in that room, and the guy Luke is like, "That's messed up. Miguel's doing double the work than all of us, and he makes way less than all of us." And I remember thinking, "Shit, is that true?" Like, damn. So the boss said, "Get out of my office. We don't talk about money here." So as we're walking out, he's like, "Miguel, stay back." So I go back, sit down. He's like, "I'm going to double your salary." And in my head, I was like, I wasn't excited. I was like, I quit in my head. I didn't quit right there, right? I was like, damn, this is how I'm going to be treated if I work places, right? Like, already I was the only minority. I was getting half. Pretty much what they told me was I was getting half what everybody else was getting, till a white guy stood up for me, right? And brought me in, and he doubled my salary in a day. But what I did was I took the positives. I said, all right, I'm really good at this. Like, I got really good at this, right? And this is a skill set that not a lot of people have. So I started to freelance. But I ultimately knew right there I had to start my own company, or I was going to get taken advantage of in most places, right? So it took me on that path. Later on, I started one company, it failed. Then I started another company, and it was mass ideation. So I've been doing mass ideation since 2009. And it's pretty much how I started. There was a little bit of, the first job I ever had was working at a record label, because as you know, in the hood, there's only 2 ways out, right? Sports or music. So I was
I would say that you can also be a drug dealer.
Well, that's not out, right? That's staying in. kind
Well,
of.
it
Yeah, I
depends
guess.
how much money you make.
Yeah, yeah.
And I mean,
You can Nino Brown it, sure.
the financing of innovation, um, where's the money gonna come from in these communities?
Well,
So
who pays for record?
That's what I'm saying,
A lot of
yeah.
record industry money is the drug money. So
you gotta start somewhere.
yeah,
I mean, it's not
it's
you
the
know,
only resources we had, right?
pretty much, yeah.
So okay, like as a white heterosexual male, which is the typical top of the technology world, why have you spent the last 13 years in the Bronx? What the hell is your problem?
Yeah. Yeah, I think my family's definitely asking that question. My peers are definitely asking that question. Even to a certain extent, the people I started Scenic with are asking that question as well at this point, because it was a gradual process. I grew up. I grew up pretty privileged economically, and especially I grew up traveling around the world. My parents made the conscious decision. So I'm originally Scottish and French, partly Moroccan, and there's some Polish as well in the bloodline. My parents made the conscious decision to not stay in France, and I think it had a lot to do with what the potential for economic advancement was. I think it's relatively true in Europe that you have a lot of old money, right? And that old money is very hesitant to get into new ideas. So
They don't have to risk. There's no reason to risk. Right?
yeah, technically, why would you risk if
You're
you're
set.
yeah? I mean, I think that's like a real theme.
Yeah,
It's like,
yeah.
what we find, but so they made the conscious decision to travel around the world, and so my brother, my sister, and I'm the oldest of the three siblings, but I lived in France, Mexico, United Kingdom, in London, Japan, and then in the United States. When I was 1 year old, I spent a year in. Actually, spent a few years in Indianapolis when I was really young, and then, I lived in Detroit, lived in New Rochelle, in Westchester, and it's my senior year of high school that my parents moved us from Tokyo to New York. And then once I landed in New York, that was it. Like, it was this place. It was the only place in the world that I had ever been where you could be from anywhere and it was still fine. You could still belong. You'd be a New Yorker. Because here, everybody's from another place, one way or another. So, and then after school, so I attended a Ivy League school, studied architecture, economics. Really was on the path to a lot of my peers who I graduated with went on to get jobs in investment banking. This was late 90s, so we're the same age, right? Like I was born in 78. Late 90s, investment banking, that was the place to be. But I chose to go into the music business. I was in a band, loved music, and it's really at that first job that entrepreneurship. It was a pretty entrepreneur. I worked at two very big New York recording studios, Hit Factory and Sony. No, sorry, Hit Factory and Unique Recording, and I think they both disappeared now with the demise of the music business. And then I worked for a record company, and that's where I really found out you're probably gonna. Actually, my boss at the time just straight up told me, you should just start a company. That's just the kind of personality that you have. I don't think you're ever gonna do very well with a boss. Yeah. so you should just start your own company. And so I did. It's back in 2000, Scenic Media and Technology. And we moved to the Bronx in 2005. We were growing, and we needed a bunch of space for recording studios. And so there's a photo studio, a little video editing room, a pretty nice audio studio here in this space right here, actually. And we needed space. Where were we gonna go in New York City to find literally cheap space? That's what we needed. And chose the Bronx, South Bronx. This is 2005. It was really a place that people like me, like the only thing that we knew about the South Bronx, or my family or my friends' families knew about the South Bronx, is that it's the place that you go through when
to get to Manhattan.
Right, to get to Manhattan without having to pay the toll on the Triborough Bridge. Right, so you get off, take the 3rd Avenue, which is right there. So that's what I knew about the South Bronx, and the general directive was, don't stop, and if you have a flat tire, you're as good as
at that company where we worked on Disney. When I told people I was from the Bronx, at that point I was living in New Jersey because I got into trouble. My parents moved me to New Jersey. And I had a New Jersey address. That's how come I got the job. If I had a Bronx address, I would not have got the job.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
so,
sure.
One of the guys, when I told him I'm originally from the Bronx, he was like, the only time I've ever been in the Bronx was I got off in that exit by mistake. And my wife hysterically just starts crying. And I was like, awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, in fact, in French, there's an expression. The expression is "c'est le Bronx," and it's an idiom, and what it translates as is it's a total mess. So when you encounter a total mess anywhere in the world, if you're French, you'll say "c'est le Bronx." So yeah, my family, my family, and the families of the people involved in the company, definitely thought we were crazy. But then, so that was 2005, and then for about 5 years, that was really all it was. Just a good space that we're still in today at an unbeatable rent, where we could do whatever we wanted because no one cares about the Bronx. For the past 30 years, no one cared about the Bronx. It's really only recently that, with some hardcore gentrification, people are, starting to make the front page of the Metro section of the New York Times. It's like, oh, you can get cheap, nice apartments, right? Now you real estate developers, it's like a whole new game now. But and then I met this guy named Paul Ramirez, right from Mainland Media, Bronx Beer Hall, and he was really the one to say you should start looking north. Because, right here we're at the tip of the South Bronx, literally. So you should start looking north and find out, what's going on in this community. There's a lot of potential. So we started, and I guess I met you, it was 2000, it was the end of 2013, up at a Fordham University event. And by that time, we had started to get more and more involved in the life of the community. And started to make the calculation that you had this thriving culture here, even though there's no money, in public housing, there's like a high, criminality, like all sorts of major problems. But there's still a culture, there's still people, and their culture isn't worth any less than any other culture, right?
Create hip hop.
So definitely the way I like to see it is in the Bronx you're allowed to be a human being, which is something that I don't find anymore in the rest of the city. I feel, everything has become super kind of regimented, and if you live in Williamsburg or Brooklyn Heights, then it's a certain lifestyle, and you have to participate in that lifestyle. And I think that just applies most of New York City. Whereas in the Bronx, you can still be a human. So I love the place, and I love the culture. But what was very clear is that, and as it's happening right now, is that at some point, the real estate was so cheap that there were going to be developers coming from downtown and midtown.
Once it wasn't as scary as instantly crying once you get off the highway.
Even if it is like, if you're paying, if it's that much cheaper, eventually you're gonna have someone who's gonna put down $250 million, which is exactly what's going on, and they're rebuilding the entire community.
It's not Harlem, right?
Yeah, exactly. Although Harlem, yeah. What that led to was, little by little, trying to understand why is it that there's such a high level of talent in places like the Bronx and among communities where there's not that many people like me, and yet somehow that talent never translates into local enrichment.
Yeah.
Right? There are very few people who, professional athletes, like you said, but little by little finding that there's almost no understanding on the ground. It's kind of like a binary system. Like, on the one hand, you have this sort of charity economy, where it's like not-for-profits, basically rich white people who are saving, so tax breaks, but also this idea of, we're going to save these poor people, and they just so happen to, be brown and black. And, so that on the one hand, and on the other hand, this like superhero model where, if you make it to the NBA, you're all set, but that's one out of how many 100,000, So there's basically no viable
middle.
Right, like market-driven economic development is just not a thing. And finding that out, and then from there imagining the potential of these communities. Yeah, and that really blew my mind. So at this point, I just don't see what else I could be doing. And certainly as the years have passed, my peers, the path that I should have taken, not making any money.
What are you doing? Not being a one percenter.
Yeah, exactly. Like, why aren't you just enjoying your privilege?
Yes.
And having a great time, right?
That's kind of what the hell's your problem, right? Because I know when people see you here, they're like, what's up with this guy? How is this guy gonna jerk us? But what I think people don't understand is kind of jerking themselves, right? Like the fact that me and you have had some of the most craziest conversations about where this needs to go, and that made us create MetaBronx, right? And help things like the first ever venture-backed startup happen, is because we were willing to sit in a room and have those conversations, right? Instead of just seeing white people and being like, oh, you know what I mean? Like, But I think part of what needs to happen going forward is we need to start bringing these conversations to light, and that's part of why we're doing the show, right? We wanted to start airing some of these conversations that we have, which are probably not too media friendly, let's just say.
Yeah, it's just yeah. It's like I think starting MetaBronx, raising money for MetaBronx,
raising money for each startup, period, right? And then MetaBronx as a whole.
Yeah.
Let alone, and then let alone our own companies that actually pay our bills, right? Like this is all non-for-profit stuff right now, right? In a way.
Yeah.
It's all been, out of the goodness of our hearts, but eventually, can't do that forever, literally, right? Like you can't pay your bills on good work, right? God's work. Like a lot of people tell us, you're doing God's work, and we're like, yeah.
Yeah, well, we've concluded many times that, trying to, that this focus on diversity and trying to, number one, understand the source of the discrimination, and number two, try to remedy it some way. And to me, I just want to be super clear about this. I don't really buy the "it's not fair" argument. I know it's not fair, the way that people are treated when they're not, wealthy white men. But nature's not fair.
Yeah.
So in a way, it's not a valid argument. But what is a valid argument is you've got 70% of the U.S. workforce that isn't white men.
Mm-hmm.
So only 30% is white men.
Yep.
And yet we take 70% of the capital that goes into the innovation economy in general, and we invest it in that 30%. And so we're taking 70% of the resources and investing them in 30% of the population. And I just don't see, from a strictly mathematical, never mind biases, from a strictly mathematical standpoint, how do you stay competitive as an economy if you're not leveraging 70% of your innovation potential just because, people don't have a penis, or
No,
they,
you know
right?
what it is?
There's
Really-
something that just doesn't make mathematical sense
I
there.
really think what it is what's the name of the thing? Trump genes, right? Right. Like these guys think the money should be in the hands of people who are smarter, right?
Yeah.
Right. So they're like, yeah, we're just smarter than them.
Absolutely.
But at the end of the day, you know that that's not the truth. We can be as innovative as anybody else, and we're starting to see that, right? But what I look at, coming from the community, and as hard as, like I said, the block that I grew up on, some of the hardest working people you ever meet, right?
Right.
So it's not about hard work. But
Right,
what happens
right.
is,
Right.
generation by generation, we become more slackers, right? Like my parents worked, and everybody's parents who I grew up with were working like 3 jobs, crazy hours, right? We grew up and we're like, fuck that, we're not doing that. But I worked free. I had 3 jobs. I was a telemarketer. I used to bag groceries in the store, and then I freelanced for free to learn the web and learn how to code, right? Now, kids now, what I like to say, and this is going to be very controversial, is I think right now, the generation now are basically spoiled slaves. Like, they don't realize that they're slaves, and they're too spoiled to work their way out of it. Because if you'd rather be home doing nothing because nobody will pay you, then you're just going to never have anything. And what are you supposed to do? Like you said, it's not fair. There's a lion and there's a gazelle. The difference about where we are right now is you can work your way to be a lion, but you rather just be a gazelle, then you're going to get eaten by the lion. Like, what are you going to do? But we are in a time with this technology, like I said, getting that stolen computer put me in a position to be a lion instead of a gazelle. If I didn't get that computer, I would have been a gazelle, right? I would never even had that job where that guy could jerk me, right? Like, I would have never been in that position
Yeah, literally.
to get jerked. But when he doubled my salary, I was making more than both my parents, right? Because of technology together, right? So because of technology,
That's crazy. See, that's
jump is possible. But I also, this is why I say the spoiled slaves thing, and I want it to be controversial, is because I look at where we're at now, and I think in the next 50 years, automation, robotics, we don't got a lot of time to slack off. Once that line is set and there's not as many jobs,
like, you mean,
how
like
are you going to work your way up?
Cheaper labor jobs, right?
Like there's no entry level. Already it's no entry level.
Already, yeah.
So imagine when there's no entry level and no mid level.
Right. Yeah. Just basically people building robots who most likely are going to be heterosexual white men. the way it's going.
And then universal basic income, which means we're deciding how much money you get. So I do think now, I have a lot of conversations about this with people in my age group and younger about working as hard as you can right now, because there's still time to work hard. What are you going to do when there's universal basic income? Work really hard at watching TV, because you ain't going to be able to work from a mailroom up to the CEO ever again, right? Like, that's not going to happen. So in this technology ecosystem, part of why I want to create this show, create MetaBronx, is because I really feel like growing up in the hood, what we are taught is create a record label, create a t-shirt line, barber shop, tattoo shop. While we're doing those things that were maybe profitable 50 years ago, people are making AI to take your job. And the more people coding that AI, the more likely we will be in better situations once that line is hit. So
the more diverse. Essentially, it's always the same thing. And this, it really goes back to growing up around the world. Like, is coming to the United States, and I attended Cornell University in Ithaca, New York, for a year after high school, and people from different ethnic and cultural backgrounds literally had specific houses. Yeah, so it was like, the black students' housing and the.
Oh, so it was like segregated?
Pretty much, and it was just coming from having grown up in Japan and like all these different places. What was completely
in Japan, there is no segregation. Right?
Well, yeah,
everybody's Japanese.
But I mean, he still managed to,
They were racist to you.
Well, I mean, East Asia, being in East Asia as anything except an East Asian is like, that's a whole other thing. But what came out of traveling is no one's really figured this out. Like, there isn't a single country in the world that I can point to where this large-scale cultural understanding between different groups and still have a sort of dynamic, innovative economy. No one's figured this out. The United States is the closest thing, and we're still definitely testing the limits.
Yeah, 1% making 85-90% of money.
Yeah. But so, all the statistics are very clear that the more diversity of opinion, the better the decisions will be.
For sure.
Yeah, and so that like AI, the way we build the next iterations of technology depends on who builds that technology. And so who the technology will favor is going to be the people who created it.
Exactly.
And that is very dangerous. If we think it's unfair right now, it's going to get 50 times, 100 times worse if people don't get to work immediately.
Are low. Think about it. Like, it's going to be close to 0% that you can change your trajectory once.
Yeah.
So think about this, right? I saw the other day, Segways, right?
Yeah.
What they're doing with Segways now is they're putting cameras on them and they're making them security guards. So they're driving around automated.
Oh, okay.
And they're recording, right? So one person types, how do they know who's a criminal? And I'm like, take a wild guess. Skin tone darker than X equals criminal, right?
Sure.
So
sure. Yeah,
we need to be the ones saying, hey, I'm in this room. You really gonna do that, right? And don't think that shit does not happen.
Oh,
and
it absolutely happens.
So end of the day, it's kind of like what are we doing here, right? And I'm not saying don't start a clothing line, a tattoo shop, but I'm saying like we are literally
Yeah, this is urgent.
yeah, like
Yeah.
we're running up against that cliff,
Yeah.
and most people do not see the cliff coming.
No, absolutely.
And whenever you talk about the cliff, it's kind of like, oh, you know, I just
Yeah,
want to
well,
chill.
no one wants to hear that.
I don't want to work. You know, I mean, or yeah, I want to work, but I don't want to do that. I'm not a tech guy.
Yeah.
And realistically, there's no business around that's not a tech business anymore.
Right.
Like you
In
can't
some
say that
fashion.
now. If you say that, you're just going out of business. Like, okay, don't be a tech business. You won't be a business soon. So
Yeah.
hopefully what we do here with this show, and part of what we're starting to talk about now and when we bring in guests, is to start opening up conversation. Definitely want to hear anything you have to say about anything we've said here, especially the spoiled slaves part. Um, and any questions, of course, part of it is me and Philip each pretty much every single day get calls from new startup founders with questions. We want to start kind of bringing those questions to a platform like this to answer them for many people, because a lot of times it's the same exact questions. And it's just because, like I said, where we come from, we're not taught this. This stuff is brand new to a lot of people. I'm lucky enough to be in tech for 20 years because I got a stolen computer. You know, it is what it is. But not everybody had that luckiness, you know? So, on our closing remarks, anything you want to talk about? Anything you want to say?
Well, I mean, there's so many things that I love to say, but I've noticed that a lot of the time having these conversations does make people uncomfortable. And the thing is, we gotta get over that. We gotta, like, if it's uncomfortable for just a short period of time, and then, like you said, the dam opens up and people start really saying what they think. If there's one thing I've noticed from working in the Bronx is, for people to feel comfortable enough to say what they really think, it takes
Time.
time. It also takes an environment, which is what we're trying to create, where people don't get excluded because of the way they look, the way they dress, the way they talk, and that's it's a wide ranging collaboration. So I would put the emphasis on collaboration between as many different types of people as possible.
Yeah, and I second that. I think the only reason we are right now in front of a camera talking about this is because me and Philip literally have had thousands of hours worth of these conversations, right? And we've literally said exactly what we thought, no matter how PC from either side. And what it did was it made a strategic partnership possible that was a win-win for both sides, that most people would not have continued. They would have just been like, this is too uncomfortable, and just like I have people on my team, he has people on his team that feel that, right? That have felt that. And us as leaders, we figured, if we don't do this, who will, right? And we ended up doing it, and we're still doing it, and we look to continue to do it. And this show, we want to have the visual of you seeing us do it. And we, because we did it, we are able to meet and bring guests that most of the time would not care about the Bronx at all unless they saw something like this happening. And now that this is happening, we're getting people that are not just coming up for the cheap real estate. They're coming up for the innovation and the opportunities. And we look forward to showing you those innovations and opportunities with the Bronx Tech Show. So have a good night or day, whatever time you're watching this. Follow MetaBronx. Follow Scenic. Follow Mass Ideation. The Rise TV.
Glass Files.
Glass Files. And we will be back next week.
Next week. Thanks.